Ma'am, you are still under hospital.
You were about to move on to mental disorder.
Okay. My Lord, so we are on point 6.4, mental disorder, on page 22.
Yes.
Under mental disorder, there's sexual deviance. So that is a stable pattern of deviant sexual arousal towards inappropriate persons or objects, and paraphilia and pedophilia would
Yes.
so that would include pedophilia. And based on the above academic literature, as well as collateral information and the psychological test results, Mr. Ninow is not seen as having any sexual deviance. And that includes pedophilic disorder, although it is a concern that he targeted a child. This risk factor refers to a pattern of behavior. So this risk factor is not indicated. Antisocial personality disorder. The essential feature of antisocial personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of disregard and violation of the rights of others that begins in childhood and continues into adulthood. It's characterized by arrogant and deceitful interpersonal style, impulsivity, and a lack of empathy. Although Mr. Ninow displays features of impulsivity and antisocial behavior, such as drug use, he does not have features pertinent to this disorder, such as a lack of conscience or empathy. And then also I refer again to the DSM-5 and quote, when antisocial behavior in an adult is associated with a substance use disorder, the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder is not made unless the signs of antisocial personality disorder were also present in childhood and have continued into adulthood. Although Mr. Ninow has displayed aggressive behavior since childhood, there is no evidence of a pervasive pattern of violating the rights of others. His grandmother, ex-fiancé and ex-tutor, who also became his friend, reported that when he was sober, he was a caring person. Even when he was intoxicated, he's never been violent with anybody close to him. His tutor admitted that he sometimes had a short temper, but he's never seen him engage in physical aggression. So the risk factor for antisocial personality disorder is therefore not indicated. Major mental illness refers to substantial impairment of the person's cognition, affect, or behavior, or it can be referred to as psychiatric illness. Major mental illness may lead to impulsive or irrational decisions to act in a sexually violent manner. And then research indicates that the major mental illness, those that seriously impair cognition and affect, are associated with an increased risk of criminality and violence. As described above, Mr. Ninow was diagnosed with unspecified bipolar disorder with substance abuse at the age of 15 years old, and he was admitted to Denmark Psychiatric Hospital 3 times. So the risk for major mental illness is therefore indicated. Problems with substance use, so that includes use of illegal drugs as well as misuse of legal substances such as alcohol. Substance use problems may lead to impulsive and irrational decisions to act in a sexually violent manner. It is clear that Mr. Ninow is still addicted to drugs. As stated above, he has attended rehabilitation centers twice in the past but relapsed thereafter. The risk factor for problems with substance use is therefore indicated. Violent or suicidal ideation. So the risk factor reflects the experience or thoughts of harming oneself or others. The importance of suicidal ideation as a risk factor is that thoughts of harm may shift rapidly from self to others. As described above, Mr. Ninow has had suicide attempts previously when he was younger and is currently considered at risk for suicide. So the risk factor is therefore indicated. Social adjustment. So there we're looking at problems with intimate relationships. Problems with intimate relationships involve failure to establish or maintain stable romantic or sexual relationships with age-appropriate partners. Mr. Ninow has never had difficulty with intimate relationships. He had 3 long-term intimate relationships which lasted between 2 and 3 years each. So this risk factor is thus not indicated. Problems with non-intimate relationships. This involves the failure to establish or maintain a positive social support network. The related terms are social alienation, loneliness, negative peer relationships, etc. Mr. Ninow stated that he's never really had long-term friends except his cousin, whom he was very close to. His grandmother stated that he had difficulty as a child to develop friendships due to his anger. He did develop a friendship with his tutor in grade 12, but they are no longer friends, and his ex-fiancée described his friends as druggies and bad news, and she was referring to the people that he did drugs with. She never wanted to socialize with him. So this risk factor is indicated. Even though he did have non-intimate relationships, he doesn't seem to have close friends that are not using substances. Problems with employment, so this factor reflects the failure to establish and maintain stable employment. Although both Mr. Ninow and his ex-fiancée reported that he did very well in his role as a salesperson when he was sober, they also reported instability in his employment history, in that he was only employed for a few months at a time and he would resign due to his drug addiction. So the risk factor for problems with employment is therefore indicated. Non-sexual criminality. So this refers to serious criminal conduct that is not sexual in nature. Serious in terms of this assessment means the criminal conduct was persistent, frequent, diverse, and involved severe potential harm to victims. The history of general criminality is a risk factor for violence and sexual violence. As stated above, before committing the current crime, Mr. Ninow had no criminal record, and therefore, although he engaged in criminal behavior, such as drug taking and stealing from his grandmother's house to support his drug addiction, as far as could be established, he doesn't have a history of serious criminal conduct. So this risk factor is not indicated. Then the last cluster of factors we look at is manageability. And the first one is problems with planning. This factor reflects problems making and implementing pro-social life plans. Related terms are poor self-management, unrealistic goals, inability to delay gratification, and impulsivity. Mr. Ninow does not necessarily show problems with planning, but rather with poor self-management and impulsivity, as seen with his drug use and emotional volatility, especially when intoxicated with alcohol, which would then derail any pro-social life plans that he may have had. The risk factor for problems with planning is therefore partly indicated. And the last risk factor is problems with treatment. And this reflects the failure to benefit from rehabilitative services designed to address the deficits that the person's psychosocial adjustment. Examples are treatment rejection, non-compliance, or dropout. As described above, Mr. Ninow completed the 8-month rehabilitation program at Healing Wings, as well as the program at Houghton House, as far as I could establish. So whilst he did complete the programs, he did relapse after both programs. He also defaults on his psychiatric medication when he uses drugs. So this risk factor is therefore indicated. Point 7, my lord, accused perspective on crime. Mr. Ninow has immense regret for what he's done. He feels extremely guilty and ashamed of himself. He admits that nothing can justify what he did. And I think I don't know if I need to go into detail about that. On the next page, when asked what effect he thinks the offence would have on his victim, he cried, saying, "She's going to hurt a lot, she will go through a lot, she might have problems trusting people again." He said, yeah, so all that he can relate to is his own experience. His grandmother also reported that he's extremely remorseful, and he also feels extreme regret and remorse towards his grandmother. Point 8, treatment. Cognitive behavioral therapy has now been generally accepted as the most effective approach to treating sexual offenders. And most importantly, that this therapy targets the dynamic risk factors, which I will summarize just now again, and focus on educating the client about risky situations and potential precursors for sexual offences against children, such as association with antisocial peers or drug abuse. The greatest factor in rehabilitation is, of course, the willingness of the accused to accept full responsibility for the crime and willingness to undergo treatment. Although there's no guarantee that treatment will be successful, the accused in this matter have accepted full responsibility for the crime and said he is willing to undergo treatment. Then, my lord, in summary, as stated above, Mr. Ninow's early parenting, so there I refer to those factors earlier, such as his parents' young age, the fact that they were drug addicts, the fact that his mother also has a psychiatric illness, witnessing the abuse of his mother. So those factors, plus his own abuse history, including alleged sexual abuse, and being intoxicated with alcohol and drugs at the time of committing the offence, cannot necessarily be seen as direct causal factors for his offence, but it could potentially have played a role in his behaviour when committing the crime. Based on the above risk assessment, the following static risk factors have been identified. That is his own child abuse, mental illness, and physical coercion. Mental illness can be a static and a dynamic risk factor because it was there before the crime, but it's still there and will still be there and will still be needed to manage after the crime. In terms of dynamic risk factors, the risk factors that I've identified is problems with substance use, problems with treatment adherence, mental illness, and that includes suicidal ideation, and then self-management, or rather problems with stress and coping. As I said, he uses drugs to cope or to escape his reality. And then there's partly problems with planning, there's more problems with impulsivity. And then there's also problems with non-intimate relationships as well as unstable employment. Multiple research of decades of sex offender recidivism research have shown two major risk factors related to sexual offences, which are, the first is deviant sexual interest, and the second one is antisocial personality disorder. These risk factors are psychologically meaningful because deviant sexual interest, and so there we talk about, for instance, a sexual interest in an inappropriate object or person, such as a child. Because deviant sexual interest can be viewed as the motivations for committing the sexual offence, whereas having an antisocial personality disorder represents factors that facilitate on acting on those motivations. And as discussed earlier, antisocial personality disorder involves not having a conscience, not being able to empathize or put yourself in somebody else's shoes, repeated interaction or conflict with the law, etc. Mr. Ninow's drug addiction is probably the risk factor that is most concerning. It's imperative that he adheres to rehabilitative treatment for alcohol and drugs, and that he adheres to psychological and psychiatric treatment in order to better regulate his emotions. Based on the report writer's interactions with Mr. Ninow and clinical observations, he does appear to be sincerely remorseful and having insight into his actions and its consequences. A stabilizing factor in his life is the unwavering support of his grandmother. Unless Mr. Ninow adheres to rehabilitative treatment for alcohol and drugs, as well as psychological and psychiatric treatment, he is considered at risk to reoffend. My Lord, do you want me to read the recommendations as well?
You want the recommendations to be read, Mr. Albert?
Yeah, I think
She is your witness.
Okay, so the recommendations is that he requires drug rehabilitation treatment. He should see a psychiatrist for management of his psychiatric medication. He should also see a clinical psychologist for individual psychotherapy, as well as attend any group therapy or any programs that can aid in his psychological treatment.
Thank you. My Lord, if I could then request that the CV be marked Exhibit H and the report Exhibit I.
Yes.
Well, we're not supposed to use I or J.
Any objection, ma'am?
No, ma'am.
You said a CV.
CV would be H and the report Exhibit J.
J. Yes.
Then there's just one thing to clarify. Antisocial personality disorder, in layman's terms, what would that be called?
So it also is referred to as psychopathy. So it is somebody who, like I said, on the one hand, has constant conflict with the law because they break rules, they have no respect for any laws, so they're often in conflict with the law. But they also don't have any respect for others' rights, so they will violate other people's rights. And what makes them able to do that recurringly is the fact that they don't have any empathy with their victim.
In short, a psychopath.
Yes.
But that is not in it.
No.
Thank you, Lord. I've got no further questions for this witness.
Mrs. Ngobe.
Thank you, my lord. Ma'am, your report stems back from the accused's childhood, correct?
Correct, my lord.
You have highlighted the trauma that he suffered as a child, and as a result of that, then you also indicated to the court what might be the effect as he grows up. Is that correct?
Correct.
Ma'am, you said at the age of, he started staying with his grandmother at the age of 8 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And by that time, he was already sexually abused. He has already witnessed abuse.
That's correct.
And he was not yet on drugs and alcohol. Is that correct?
That's correct, my lord.
Now, he referred to his mother as his idol and a pillar of support.
Grandmother. Grandmother.
Grandmother, yes.
Yes.
At that age, do you agree with me that 8 years is still a tender age? And if given a support, love, and taken care of, were there any chances that he would, if he would turn out to be a different person to what he is today?
Just rephrase the question, please.
Look, he was abused.
Yes.
Then from the age of 4 up until, say, before 8 years old.
Before he lived with his grandmother.
Yes, before he lived with his grandmother. And the grandmother took him in, gave him love and support, and was always willing even to take him for rehabilitation to rehabilitation centers.
Correct.
Now, if he did not engage in drugs and alcohol, is it possible that he would have turned a different person as he is today?
I believe so, my lord.
And the trauma or the effect of abuse, trauma, and all the that he has suffered as a child will always show different to different people. Is that correct?
That's correct, my lord.
So a different person, say a child who has been abused, exposed to sexually abused and witness abuse, two different children, when they grow up, they may tend to be different people.
That's correct.
Others may be aggressive and others not.
That's correct.
Ma'am, this I'm saying because the manner in which the accused testified and verbalized before this court that the grandmother was very supportive and was always the pillar of his strength. What do you think went wrong with him to turn up to be what he is today?
I think the influence of his mother was not good, because when he started visiting her is reportedly when he started using drugs.
Okay.
So although the grandmother did everything in her power to give him a stable childhood, when her daughter asked her, "Can Mr. Ninow please come and stay with me for the weekend?" she allowed it.
Now, the fact that the accused was afforded opportunities, in his own evidence, he said 5 times he went to for treatment centers. Now, if he was willing to turn a different person, would that not have helped him?
My lord, it would. What he said to me was that he went to these rehabilitation centers because the first psychiatrist referred him there in her referral letter, and he did it to please his grandmother. As he stated this morning, he was for a long time in denial about his drug addiction. So what he's saying now is that he wasn't always as motivated when he was doing those programs.
And is he verbalizing to be motivated at the moment?
That's correct, my lord.
Could it be because he knows that in this case he's facing a possible life imprisonment?
My lord, I wouldn't know what his reasons would be.
But could that be possible?
Is that
Look-
a possibility?
Sorry?
Is that a possibility?
It is a possibility.
Thank you. The reason why asking this question is because you said people or pedophiles, not that, okay, you said pedophiles sometimes have a character to be able to be manipulative.
My lord, I said the antisocial personality disorder
an-
has that character trait of being manipulative.
Antisocial. And a person who is manipulative can never be always truthful. Is that correct? Because if you manipulate, you need to get a situation favorable to yourself.
That's
Is that
correct.
not so? So will you agree with me that such kind of a person may not always be truthful?
That's correct, my lord. But like I said, I don't think he has that characteristic. So I don't think that antisocial personality disorder is a risk factor in this case.
Ma'am, for you, you have assessed the accused and you have drafted up this report. How many times have you visited the accused in prison to see him?
3 times, my lord.
And for how long?
I can go to the beginning of my report, page 3, 1.4. Clinical interviews with the accused on, and then I give the date. So the first was 1 hour and 30 minutes. The second time I interviewed him was 2 hours and 30 minutes, and the third time was 2 hours.
So basically it was plus or minus 6 hours.
That's correct.
And you were able to extract information from his childhood up until now and be able to make those diagnoses that you have made.
That's correct.
In
I was
6
not-
hours.
Not just, because the 1.4 says sources used for the compilation of the report. So I used the information that I got from him, as well as the information I got from his grandmother and his ex-fiancée. I spent at least 2.5 hours with the ex-fiancée, at least 3 hours with the grandmother face-to-face. So and of course all the documentation, the case docket, the affidavit from his custody matter, so where I got also a lot of information. The psychiatric report from West Copies, the healing wings, I received records from, I received a copy of even his prescription for the medication from his psychiatrist. So there were multiple sources.
Did you receive the record of the evidence in this matter?
Sorry, my lord.
Did you receive the record of evidence, transcribed record?
Not printed, but
So you don't know what is the evidence?
No, I know. I was sent the verdict, your verdict that you delivered.
Only
So-
the judgment.
The judgment, yeah. So
Yeah,
from
but
the-
you don't know the facts of this matter.
I know the facts of the matter. My Mr. Alberts, who instructed me, informed me.
Yes.
And ma'am, you mentioned also that just a moment, my lord.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that the accused seems to display behavior of difficulties in terms of anger, outburst, and occasional impulsive behavior.
Correct, my lord.
So his impulsive behavior, if you say occasional, it means it's controllable.
It means occasional, that it happens at times, and at other times it's not that impulsive.
And you further mentioned that the use of a drug, cat, has sexual stimulant that could cause a person to be sexually aroused.
That's what the literature says, my lord. The academic literature.
And you mentioned that a person who is in use of such a drug, when sexually aroused, may sometimes want to have or to relieve themselves, who would want to relieve themselves to an adult. If an adult is not available, then they may tend to a child as a surrogate, correct?
That's correct, my lord.
Now, there's evidence before this court that Mr. Ninow made utterances of willing or wishing to have sexual intercourse with a certain adult woman. And the fact that that woman was not available for him. In your opinion, is it possible that he had to relieve himself, opted to make this child, the victim in the case, as a sacrifice, a surrogate for the sexual
That is possible, my lord.
desires? And the evidence says that is what points to the fact that that is what he did.
That's possible.
Let me just understand, how possible is that? Do you know, you said
So
you don't know
I'm
the
just
facts.
saying that obviously in his mind, in that moment, I don't know exactly what he was thinking, but it's very possible that he was sexually aroused and there wasn't an adult there, so he turned to a child. I'm saying it's very possible.
Yeah, but you said you don't know the facts of this matter.
No,
This incident happened inside a toilet of a restaurant where there were adult and young people present.
I'm aware of that, my lord.
Yes. So where does your answer feature in?
So I'm saying that it is very possible that that this explanation, that we can indeed apply it to what happened in this matter. So I'm saying that he was sexually aroused and there wasn't an adult available, so he turned to a child and raped the child.
But there were adult people around them.
Yeah, my lord, I can't say why exactly in that moment he decided to do that.
And also, you say, in the dynamics of sexual behavior of, say, a pedophile or a person that is in use of drugs, they may shift, the aggression may start, they may be self-infliction, they may be a danger to themselves, inflicting self-injuries to themselves, and it might progress to inflict injuries to others.
That's correct, my lord.
Now, ma'am, in this instance, there is evidence before this court that even when the accused was sexually aroused after he has used drugs, he will not force himself to his own fiancée. So now, in this instance, on the day in question, how do you make of that situation where now he was aroused and he prayed for the child and followed her into the bathroom?
The same answers I've just given, that I think that he was sexually aroused. There wasn't a male person available, so he then decided to turn to a child.
And ma'am, the evidence before this court shows that he did not act impulsively. He actually planned. And do you agree with me that the fact that he made utterances to want to have sexual intercourse with a woman and then the child was turned to be a surrogate. That is what he planned to have had sexual intercourse with the child.
That is the facts that the court found, that he planned it.
And you do agree with the facts and coupled with your investigation. Is that correct?
When I spoke to Mr. Ninow, he maintains his version of the story, but I am working with what the court found, which is that it was planned.
You see, ma'am, when you were called to compile the report, it was specifically a pre-sentence report. What did you understand by that?
I would like to refer to the, let me just get the page number. Page 2,
Yes.
introduction. Purpose of report. So I say there that Mr. Alberts asked me to do a pre-sentencing report. I then say Mr. Ninow was found guilty of rape of a minor, possession of drugs, and defeating the ends of justice. Purpose of report, I quote from a guide to sentencing in South Africa. The main purpose of a pre-sentence report is to assist the presiding officer in gaining a better understanding of the offender and the reasons for his crime, be better informed about the character in the broader sense of the word, and the possible future of the offender. This is one of the triad of factors the court has to consider in sentencing. This triad is one of the general principles of sentencing and consists of three basic elements, namely the crime, the criminal, and the interest of society. And then a quote again from the sentencing book that says, assistance by experts in the field of human behavior can therefore be of much assistance in determining the effect this factor should have on the eventual
Yes, ma'am,
sentence.
I do understand that. That is a quotation of a book that you read. My question is, in your own words, what was the purpose of this report?
My Lord, the purpose of the report was to give a detailed history of the accused, and also to help the court to maybe understand factors that possibly influenced his behavior when he committed the crime, and then also looking at the future of the offender and what risk he poses currently.
Is it not the purpose of a pre-sentence report to assist the court in coming to an appropriate sentence?
My Lord, I can't hear.
Is it not the purpose of a pre-sentence report to assist a court to come to an appropriate sentence?
Yes, but only with this one element of the triad, namely the criminal. The court has to take into consideration the interest of society and various other things. So it's not my role to propose a specific sentence. I am here to give the court insight into the history and the behavior and the possible future of the criminal, which the court can then use to do a sentence.
Now, in other words, your report sketch as to what may have caused him to commit the offense, or how he committed the offense?
Yes, so the factors that I describe under point 3, point 3 and point 4. I would like to just read from our report on page 15. That would be the summary or conclusion of those two parts of the report. These factors, namely parenting factors, I mentioned them earlier, but I can mention them again.
You say page 15 on
15, right at the bottom.
paragraph?
4.118.
Okay.
So these factors, namely parenting factors, his own sexual abuse history, and being intoxicated with alcohol and drugs at the time of committing the offense, cannot necessarily be seen as direct causal factors. So I'm not saying that he committed this crime because he was intoxicated or because he was abused as a child. I'm just saying it's factors in his life that might have played a role in understanding his behavior. So I go on to say, but based on the above academic literature, could potentially have played a role in his behavior, and it could be risk factors for the future.
Now, you mentioned that you correctly say that these factors, they are not the cause, or they are not the direct causal factors to the offense.
That's correct, my lord.
Now, the accused in his own testimony, he mentioned that he does not care anymore, nothing matters anymore, he's full of anger, and as you agreed earlier on, that the degree of infliction of injury may always increase from oneself to another. Taking into consideration that he was also taken for rehabilitation to rehabilitation centers 5 times. And at one instance, he was expelled before, at Denmark, he was expelled because he continued to use the drugs.
That's correct, my lord.
All those factors taken together, wouldn't you say the accused is a danger to the community?
I'd like to refer to my summary on page 27. In fact, page 28.
Page 28.
9.9.
Yes.
Unless Mr. Ninow adheres to rehabilitative treatment for alcohol and drugs, as well as psychological and psychiatric treatment, he's considered at risk to reoffend.
And the fact that he was at a rehabilitation center 5 times already, and at one stage he was expelled. And at all times he was using drugs, and in his own evidence today here, he said he's still using drugs in prison.
That's correct, my lord.
Do you agree that he is a danger to the community?
I believe he's a danger if he does not adhere to his psychiatric treatment and drug rehabilitation. I think once those factors are managed, the risk would become lower.
But will they be manageable if the offender, in the form of the accused, is unwilling to cooperate or to accept that he's got a problem? And
so if he's still denying that he has a problem and doesn't want to accept treatment,
or the persistent use of drugs?
Yeah, so if he is not willing to undergo treatment, then it wouldn't be possible to rehabilitate him. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
Look, he's been to a rehabilitation center 5 times already, and he has seen different kind of professionals who can try and assist him.
Yeah.
And always, even in the rehabilitation centers, he will continue to take drugs.
Yes.
Will that not make him a risk to the community?
I believe that if he does not adhere to the treatment,
he has already
so
been taken in, and he did not adhere to the processes. Will you still say he is safe to be out there with the community? Or
I don't think it's my place to make that decision.
Yeah, but you are an expert. You can't say it's not your place. You are an expert. Why are you called? You are called here to assist them.
So I think that he is at a higher risk to to reoffend if he continues his drug use and he doesn't adhere to psychiatric medication. If those factors are under control, I think he is a lower risk for society to reoffend, to sexually reoffend.
Ma'am, you say it is not in your place to say whether he is a risk to the community. Is it in your place to say he may not re-offend or he may not reuse the drugs if given a chance? Taking into consideration the chances that he was afforded going to the rehabilitation centers.
So we've got the history that he has relapsed every time, and that's why I've indicated it as a risk factor, treatment adherence. Going forward, and as I said earlier, we can only go on what the accused tell us, and he told me that all the previous times he wasn't really motivated. He says he's motivated now. Whether he's going to adhere to treatment, we don't know. We have the history of him completing programs though. He hasn't dropped out, but he has relapsed every time. So in terms of the history, I mean, I think, you know, in general, drug addiction is a lifelong thing that is difficult to be rehabilitated from. But that's going to depend on himself.
Ma'am, even after he has verbalized that he intends to change, he is in prison. Today, he mentioned that he has taken drugs in prison, right in prison, more than 20
He told me
times.
as well.
Would you say he's a person who's maybe who can possibly rehabilitate,
I think
despite him verbalizing that he is ready to change, yet he takes drugs still?
I think it is possible for him to rehabilitate, but I agree with you, those factors is negative factors. The fact that he's still...
Those
grateful.
factors, if I may put it, do I understand you correctly that those factors makes him a risk to the community?
There is the possibility that he will reoffend, yes.
And that will make him a risk to the community.
That's correct, my lord.
Ma'am, you are in a private practice, correct?
Correct?
And you came at a fee? At a fee?
Lord, I don't know if that is...
I don't know the relevance of what's the relevance.
I will withdraw
Are
that.
you saying she's a hired guy?
As the court pleases, my lord.
The role of an expert, we have to be neutral. I think that's what he's trying to say to you. Do you understand it?
I know.
Yes.
As the court pleases. And ma'am, the evidence before this court clearly indicated that the accused planned on that day. He preyed on the child, attacked her, and raped her.
Correct, my lord?
And I further put it to you, finally, that there is no way that the accused can rehabilitate, taking into consideration that he's been given a chance, he's been to rehabilitation centers before, and he did not consider turning a new leaf.
My lord, I can't agree with the words, there's no way, because we can't say that. There is a possibility that he will be rehabilitated.
Yeah, but based on the fact that he has been to the rehabilitation
Yes.
center in the past, and that they didn't work.
Yes, and
What are the chances now?
Yeah, so I suppose the chances, it'll be hard to put a percentage to that, because what is also saying
Yeah, but
to
if
us,
you have to summarize, what can you say?
What he's also saying to us is that previously he wasn't motivated, now he is motivated.
By
so
what?
there is a chance that he will adhere to his treatment, but we've seen a history of non-adherence. So,
But he says he's going to kill himself if he gets life sentence.
sorry, the question is?
He says he's going to kill
Yes.
himself if he gets. What is the motivation now?
He said that the motivation is just self-hate and for having committed this offense.
Yes.
And ma'am, could it be possible that the accused, knowing that you are preparing a report for pre-sentence, he could have manipulated your processes to give an outcome that, in your opinion, will make you believe that he still can change, given a chance?
My Lord, I'm not here for the accused. I'm not here for any party. I think I've done enough of these kinds of assessments, worked with enough offenders to not be manipulated, and therefore I based my opinion on my interaction with him, but as well as other multiple sources, interviews, documentation, etc. So I believe my opinion is neutral.
Ma'am, maybe you did not understand my question correctly. I'm saying, given the fact that you have mentioned that people who are on drugs, they have a character that they are able to manipulate situations to get them favorable on their side. Then the question is it possible or is it not possible that, knowing that this is a pre-sentence report, he could have manipulated your processes in order for you at the end to make an opinion, formulated an opinion that he is rehabilitative?
I said that being manipulative is a character trait of antisocial personality disorder. And I don't think that risk is not indicated in this matter. So, and I refer to my previous answer in terms of, I think that I, compile the report from multiple resources, and I have experience in doing so. So I believe that my report is neutral, objective, and I hope it will assist the court.
I'm with you on that. But now, the accused mentioned that at some stage, he requested his grandmom to book him off so that he may be away from people. How would you classify that character?
I think that is part of his depressive symptoms of hating himself and the rest of the world, and not wanting, because like I said, his main coping mechanism is the use of drugs when in stressful situations. So he's learned that as a child to always turn to drugs, which is also a way of escaping. So I would say that saying that he wants to go away would be avoiding his own problems by going to the psychiatric, just as he avoids his problems by drug use.
Antisocial disorder, will it not fit in that kind of
No, my lord.
request? That will be all, my lord.
Any reason?
Thank you, my lord. Only a few aspects. You were asked about the fact that the accused from the age of 8 years old was living in a caring as surroundings with his grandmother. Would everything else Would that mean that everything else that happened before with him could just be disregarded and erased?
I think that if his grandmother wasn't there to take care of him and he didn't have that stable relationship, that he probably wouldn't have completed school, did well at school, etc. She's like a protecting, stabilizing factor in his life. Am I answering your question? So,
would that mean that everything that happens before that doesn't matter?
No, of course not. The first 7 years of your life is quite important in terms of growth and development
And
as
if
a child.
I understand the report correctly, the mother, although the grandmother was now in control, the mother kept on having some interaction with him.
That's correct, Mother.
To remind involved in stuff. I just want to take you to paragraph of page 18 of your report, the Garosexual Behavior Scale. Maybe you can just, there were questions regarding the possibility of you being played, if I can put it that way. Could you just explain to us what the scale is and whether there are any, or the test?
Do you want her to repeat her evidence?
My Lord, that is
She dealt with it. You dealt thoroughly with this aspect.
My Lord, that aspect was specific. Maybe I should ask this because this is something that was not mentioned.
Did that question come out of cross-examination?
My Lord, the question in cross-examination was whether the accused could manipulate her. And I just want to highlight something in the report that wasn't specifically mentioned, and that is as far as the validity scale of that Garosexual behavior inventory.
Then go to the relevant part.
5.2.2.
5 point?
2.2.
Yes.
So the response validity pertain to instances where the examinee's responses is not necessarily correct, and that could be just because their focus was elsewhere and they didn't, or he may have been trying to project a false image to the examiner. For this reason, the test contains validity scale, namely the inconsistent responding index. There are 16 pairs of items that are usually given similar ratings, and when 8 or more of these pairs are inconsistent, then you cannot interpret the score of the test. You cannot assume that the protocol is valid. Mr. Ninow's score on that scale was 5, and his test protocol can thus be considered valid.
Thank you. And is it possible for you to say whether he's going to rehabilitate or reoffend? Is it possible for you to say?
He may reoffend, especially if he doesn't adhere to drug rehabilitation and psychiatric treatment. Then he's at a higher risk.
Maybe I should ask the question this way. What can you do in helping the court to decide whether there is a risk of reoffending? What have you done in this report?
So there is the chance that the offender will reoffend.
Your expertise, if I can put it that way, employed in compiling the report. What can you do to guess whether he could reoffend or not?
My Lord, I refer to page 28 of my report,
Yes.
where I mentioned that I've looked at all these different risk factors, and that literature tells us that, I'm just going to read, multiple reviews of decades of sex offender recidivism. Research has shown 2 major risk factors related to sexual offences. which are, the one is deviant sexual interest, and the other one is antisocial personality disorder. Mr. Ninow doesn't have either of these risk factors. So the chance of him, I mean, I've worked with people who they deny what they've done, they still rationalize that it wasn't that bad, etc. So from a point of view that he doesn't have a sexual interest in children, not at this stage, I can't find evidence of it, and the fact that he is not an antisocial person, therefore would increase the possibility that he will be rehabilitated and that he wouldn't re-offend.
Thank you, Lord. I've got no further questions.
Ma'am, I understand your report to say that the accused doesn't have any mental illness.
No, he does have bipolar disorder.
Yes. And then let's go to page 28 of your report.
28.
Yes. Item 9.7. You are saying that the accused is sincerely remorseful. Why are you saying that?
I'm saying that based on my interactions with him on the 3 different occasions, my clinical impressions.
Yeah, but what informed you to come to that conclusion?
Because again, like I say, I've worked with other sexual offenders who will deny that what they've done, or they would minimize it. Now, extreme minimization is one of the risk factors. So they would say it wasn't that bad. You know, she didn't have physical injuries, etc. So they would not take responsibility for what they did. And so therefore their chances of rehabilitation is almost none, because in their mind, they believe, they rationalize what they did is okay, you know, with this child, because they would say, I had a relationship with her, we love each other, etc. Whereas this offender does admit to the fact that he did it, and that he knows it was wrong, and the fact that he has insight into the possible the consequences for the victim. When I specifically asked him that on 2 occasions, that he has insight into the fact that the victim, the suffering of the victim.
Yes. Now, can you draw a line between regret and remorse? Can you draw a line between regret and remorse?
Yeah, so regret would be if you just regret something, and normally that would be because you are facing a life sentence, and so you regret what you've done. Whereas remorse is a true feeling of having empathy with your victim.
Yeah, but for the fact that the person admitted to the commission of an offense, does it indicate that he's remorseful?
The fact that no, I based that on my interactions with him when he had told me that he is remorseful and he regrets having done that. And so under point number 7, he said she didn't deserve that, she did nothing. And he admits that nothing can justify what I did to her.
But can a person said to be remorseful when he puts blame on other aspects? For example, when he came and testified here, he said if he was sober, he couldn't have done that. It is because of drugs and alcohol that he did that, whatever he done to the victim in this matter.
Yeah, so I don't share that view. I don't think.
Yeah, but you still insist that the person is remorseful?
Yes, according to my interactions with him, I think he is remorseful.
No. Based on the evidence, on his evidence in this court. I'm not talking about your interaction. I'm summarizing his evidence for you because you are not there. He said, no, if he was sober, he couldn't have done that because of drugs and alcohol. So I'm asking you, is it an indication of a remorseful person or what?
I think that he maybe doesn't understand the...
No, I'm asking you. I'm not asking the accused.
I still maintain that he is remorseful,
Yes.
sincerely remorseful.
Yes. Any question arising, Mrs. Ngule?
Nothing, ma'am.
Mr.
Nothing, thank you.
Yes. Thanks, ma'am, for your time. You are excused. Yes.
My Lord, the next witness would be the probation officer, Ms. Kelder. My Lord, again, I've got a copy of the report. Malena colleague indicated that she would have questions to the witness, so I was careful to just give the report to the court with,
Yes.
before testifying. I except that I might have miscalculated, but it's not disregarding the court.
Can go.
State of remains and surname for the record.
Theater Kelder.
Do you have any?
I can't hear you, ma'am.
Sorry. Theater Kelder.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
You swear that the evidence about to give you the truth, nothing but the truth. If so, raise up your right hand and say so help me God.
So help me God.
Yes.
You may take a seat if you like, ma'am.
Stand.
Thank you. You are social worker employed with the Gauteng Province Department of Social Development, is that correct?
That's correct, my Lord.
And can you just place your qualifications on record?
I have a degree in social work. I obtained it from the University of Pretoria
And when was that?
last year.
Can you please raise up your voice, ma'am?
Excuse me, sorry. Last year, my Lord.
Yes.
Okay. You were requested to compile a report, pre-sentence report for the accused in this matter. Is that correct?
That's correct, my Lord.
Would you mind taking us through your report? It's not necessary to read it verbatim, but just go take us through your report. Give comment, please.
Okay, I started with the background of the accused. Excuse me. I started with the accused version of the offence. He stated that he was on a 3-day drug binge, and as he was continuing with his drug use, he became increasingly deliberate and willful. He also recalls a time when he went to Arcade Empire, where he left without paying. And on the day of the incident, he wanted to go to work because he was absent the previous few days. But he decided to avoid the manager and went to his dealer instead to get some cat. On his way home, the accused stopped at the Dros restaurant because he had to think of what to say to his girlfriend because he was not going to work.
Can I just ask you, I don't want to interrupt you, but your voice trails off.
Then when he got to the restaurant, he had no plan, he says. He only sat down and drank some alcohol. And then he says the place was full of black people, so when he noticed the white person, he approached him thinking he knew him. But then he realized he does not know him, but he continued to approach him and he engaged in conversation with him. Then they shared some drinks and he talked, and he states that he could have made inappropriate comments, but he cannot recall what they were. And then he says he constantly went to the bathroom to use drugs. And then later the manager joined in the conversation. But then the accused went again to the toilets, but this time to the female bathroom. And he entered the first cubicle, but the door could not lock. And then the girl came in saying she wanted to wee, and he pulled her inside. And then I quote, he said, "My mind was very evil." And he was in another state of mind, and it was never my intention to hurt her. And then the accused say, "I must have lifted her up on the toilet and pulled her down her tights, and then I had messed up thoughts." And then the accused put his fingers in her vagina and realized it was wrong. And then I tried to put my penis in the mouth, and I was busy trying when the mom entered. And then people started pushing on the door, and I pushed back, and the door opened, and the accused ran off to the male toilets. And then he states that he cannot recall exact details of the incident. He has fragmented memories and only remembers sensitive parts. And then previous convictions, he has no previous convictions. Then I just did a genogram of his family background. Family background I obtained from the accused and also from his grandmother. The accused is 21 years old and the only child of his parents. His mother was 15 years when she gave birth to him. He never knew his biological father. The accused mother was also addicted to drugs. After birth, the accused and his mother stayed with his maternal grandparents. Then the mother of the accused began a relationship with a man and they moved in together when the accused was approximately 18 months old. Per the maternal grandmother, the relationship between his mother and the boyfriend was physically abusive, and the relationship ended and they moved back to his maternal grandparents. And then later the mother entered into another relationship, a man described as a drug dealer and addict by the grandmother. The accused and his mother moved out of his grandparents' house yet again and into the house with the other boyfriend. And then his maternal grandmother states that there were many instances of physical abuse and drug use. And so the maternal grandmother wanted to protect him as far as possible. And she recalled an incident where the accused visited her and he was full of injuries on his back, bottoms and legs, and a knob on the back of her head. And the accused then said he was thrown against the basin in the bathroom. And the accused also recalls incidents of abuse and when he was locked inside closets. And then the grandmother describes the accused at that time as a wild child, undisciplined and very much beaten. And on one occasion when the accused was 4 years old, the grandmother asked the accused how his parents were feeling, and he said mommy was cross and daddy was happy. And daddy was happy because he used baby powder in the nose. Then he demonstrated the use of baby powder, and that's when his maternal grandmother realized that they were using drugs in front of the accused. And the accused was allegedly sexually abused by a family friend when he was 4, and also another time when he was 8 years old. The accused denied any wrongdoing at that time and never made a disclosure, and no charges were made against the perpetrator. Only later did the accused disclose when he was a teenager. The accused's parents were evicted from their home, and the accused again returned to his grandparents' home. At that time, his maternal grandmother wanted custody over the accused, and a high court then ordered the grandparents' custody. Eventually, the relationship with the accused's mother and her boyfriend also ended, and she moved back to the grandmother. But then she moved out again into another physically abusive relationship, something the accused witnessed. And when the accused was 12 years old, his mother introduced him to cats. And his grandmother says that this was the end of the road for Nicholas, and described that drugs is a normal way of life for him, and he grew up with it. He had a battle with drugs his whole life, and the first 7 years of his life was absolutely horrendous. And then the accused was in psychiatric hospitals and rehabilitation centers from onwards. and his maternal grandfather passed away. Someone the accused regarded as a father figure, saying he was my father, he was my dad. And the accused has a 10-month-old son. Then I continue with employment history. He's currently unemployed. He worked in Vodacom for you. He resigned because he said the drug use interfered with his work. He worked in Colorado Vodacom for a week before he resigned, and in Woodlands he was employed, but just one day he did not show up for work. Interpersonal relationships. The accused has a close relationship with his maternal grandmother. He describes her as the most loving and caring human being alive. She's my idol. He feels tremendous guilt towards his grandmother for everything he put her through, saying, I owe her big time, I will make it up to her. She will be proud of me one day. The grandmother visits him every Tuesday and Thursday. And with his mother, he regards her as an older sister. She introduced him to drugs, and the accused feels he only gained acceptance from his mother when he would use with her. He also resents his mother that she was not there for his grandmother, and that she continuously broke down what she, the grandmother, tried to build up. The accused was in a 3-year-long relationship with his ex-fiancée. She can almost say nothing bad about the relationship, except that drugs and alcohol eventually ruined the relationship. She also says that the accused did everything for her and spoiled her, and the first year was almost like a fairy tale. But eventually drugs and alcohol took over his life and changed him into a person that she does not want to know. Physical health, he has no physical problems. Psychological health, the accused had several suicide attempts. His first attempt happened when he was 13 or 14 years old. He was then admitted to Remorse Psychiatric Hospital, where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He was put on medication, and per his grandmother, he was doing well on the medication. The accused then explained that he did not adhere to the prescription medication because it made him numb emotionally, and he could not feel anything. The accused was then admitted to Denmark again following another suicide attempt when he was 17 years old. And there was a third suicide attempt, but his grandmother cannot recall exactly when that occurred. And he was yet again admitted to Denmark. And then the Westkopjes Hospital psychiatric report also say that he is diagnosed with mixed substance abuse. He admits to using cat, crystal, meth, and dacha, but also admitted to Dr. Lukosi that he uses cocaine. And then he admitted to using drugs and alcohol still in prison. And the accused is not being currently treated for bipolar disorder. Previous treatment or intervention, he was admitted to Denmark on 3 occasions. I could not confirm the admission dates. The accused and his grandmother state that the accused was banned from Denmark Psychiatric Hospital due to illicit drug use. The accused was also a patient at Healing Wings Rehabilitation Center, and he was admitted there from March to November. The accused was also in Houghton House for a period of 30 days, but this information could not be corroborated. Impact of the offence. Okay, this was not in my mandate to do a victim impact. However, there are extensive research saying the long-term impact of abuse includes affective disorders, suicide, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, attention deficit disorder, conduct disorder, intergenerational effects, increased re-victimization, affective instability, abuse of self, and substance abuse. And women with a history of child sexual abuse have a higher rate of alcohol dependence and an overall increase in addiction to tobacco and illicit substances. Okay, my evaluation. I looked at the attachment theory. Security and attachment stems from early experiences with affectionate parents that promote attachment behavior of being responsive, available and comforting when a threat of stress presents itself. And a body of evidence suggests that maternal substance misuse is associated with maternal psychopathology, which may impair a mother's competence in providing proper care and discipline to a child. And then there's a concern for lack of secure attachment for the accused. The accused's mother drug use while the accused was in the care could have impaired her competence to provide adequate care and discipline to the accused. Hindering the formation of a secure attachment. And further evidence of a lack of secure attachment were from his unmet emotional needs. We experienced little love and affection, as he states that his mother blames him for a lot of things and acceptance he never received. And the accused's need of security was also not met when he was frequently in and out of grandmother's house. And there was no stable father figure and no predictability. And the need for responsibility was also not unlikely met, as he was introduced to drugs by his mother. Early attachment experience of insecure persons are characterized by rejecting or inconsistent parenting, which may hamper the development of inner resources necessary for successful coping with life stresses. Insecure attachment has been found to be associated with depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and substance abuse, as well as behavioral problems, including aggression, antisocial behavior, and conduct disorder. Insecure attachment is associated with dysfunctional attitudes, which predict lower self-esteem and higher depressive symptoms. Various literature shows key variable identified in the development of individual characteristics of any criminal propensity is the role played by parents in terms of factors such as attachment, child-rearing practices, neglect, abuse, supervision, and parents' own criminal behavior. Okay, poly-victimization is defined as an experience of multiple forms of trauma. Children can be exposed to various adversities, including property victimization, assault and bullying, sexual victimization, witnessing and exposure to violence, and maltreatment. The accused was exposed to property victimization when his childhood home was raided for debt owed to drug dealers. The accused was a victim of physical and sexual abuse. He witnessed violence and aggression towards his mother and suffered maltreatment in terms of psychological abuse and bullying. Poly-victimized children are at risk of several difficulties during childhood years, with a wide array of even internalizing and externalizing behavior. They show an increased risk of substance abuse, mental health difficulties, and social struggles. The accused shows various internalizing behavior with known depressions and feelings of not being good enough, being a disappointment, and full of shame. And using drugs help avoid these feelings and gives him confidence in himself. And he has also a lot of externalizing behavior in terms of aggression, impulsivity, and defiance. And the accused admits that drug use only enhanced this behavior. And then the accused's lack of secure attachment together with poly-victimization exacerbate his feelings of depression, inadequacy, disappointment, and guilt. The accused's drug use was a way of avoiding these feelings. A way of coping and a coping mechanism. And then went on to remorse. They say identifying remorse is highly subjective, and lack of remorse often correlates with other character traits, attitudes, or demeanor. For example, lack of respect, hostility, aggressiveness, lack of interest or caring, previous convictions, and how the defendants lived their life. The accused disclosed none of these character traits. The accused was respectful and forthcoming to the probation officer. The accused was very cooperative and displayed considerable concern and empathy for his grandmother, the victim, and her family. And based on this correlation, I'm of the opinion that the accused is sincere in his remorse. And then when I considered sentencing, I considered the triad of Zinn, looking at the seriousness of the offence, interest of society, and personal circumstances of the offender. Looking at the seriousness of the offence, I considered the victim, the motive, and the intent. The victim is a 7-year-old girl. The state proved intent by proving the accused followed the girl into the toilet. The accused also tried to get rid of evidence by trying to flush the victim's panties down the toilet. There are no mitigating factors in this leg of triad. In the interest of society, I looked at the prevalence of crime against women and children and the defenselessness of the victim. The victim was defenseless and overpowered by the accused. She could not call for help, and the accused prevented people from coming to her aid by pushing back on the door. Crime against women and children is especially high, and it may be in the interest of society to deter other potential offenders by handing a harsh sentence. There are no mitigating factors in this leg of the triad. The last leg of the triad consists of personal characteristics of the accused. The probation officer considered the previous trauma of the accused and has empathy for the accused. However, the accused acted impulsively and traumatized an innocent girl, continuing the cycle of trauma. Mitigating factors could be that the accused is a first offender. He was heavily intoxicated at the time of the offence. There was lack of planning. The accused shows remorse. He pleaded guilty, and he has a dependent child. And then I'm also concerned for the accused continued drug use. And also I looked at punishment as purpose for deterrence, rehabilitation, protection, and retribution. And should I read the recommendation as well?
Yes, you can read it.
I recommend that the accused be handed down a life in prison sentence for both acts of rape of a minor. And then there's just a revision clause that I can amend my recommendation should new information. A revision clause, I should amend my recommendation if I have new information.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Can you just repeat what
Okay,
you
my
said?
last bit is a revision clause, which just where I say I reserve the right to amend my assessment should new information be brought to my attention.
If you can just go to 16.3, you recommend that the accused be assessed by a psychiatrist for monitoring and treatment and planning also. The opinion as far as life imprisonment is concerned, does that relate to what's in paragraph 15.18 regarding the huge, tremendous media attention and spark a public outcry if deviation is justifiable?
No, my lord.
And then also it say in the wake of recent gender, and that is 15.19, gender-based violence protest, the need for a harsh sentence may be deemed justifiable to act with general deterrence to prevent future crimes of this nature.
No, my lord. No, final.
What do you base that?
Yeah, you're surprised by the answer.
Hello?
You are surprised by the answer. She says no.
Yeah.
You want her to elaborate?
My Lord, no, I'll leave it at that.
I can't hear you.
I'll leave it at that, my Lord.
Yes. Anything else?
My Lord, I would then just request that the report be marked Exhibit K.
Okay, any objection?
No objection, madam.
Yes, Ms. Ngobe.
If I could please, my lord, just 2 questions.
Yes.
Ma'am, I do agree with your recommendations.
Thank
The only aspect that I wanted to take up with you is on page 3. Where now the accused verbalized that he went into the first cubicle and used more drugs, but the door could not lock. Then 5.1.2, the girl came in and said she wanted to wee. I pulled her inside and my mind was very evil. I was in another state of mind. It was never my intention to hurt her. Now, at the time when you compiled this report, you were aware that the accused is convicted. And you were aware that his version, as indicated in 5.1.2, was rejected by the court. Now, him having to repeat that to you and compared it with your conclusion, rather say in page 16, the last paragraph, that he acted, yes, I agree, he acted impulsively, but now when we turn to page 17, then the accused himself says liquor and drugs did not take part, did not contribute, or he was not pushed by that to commit the offense. Now, how do you reconcile the fact that he says he's remorseful, and on the other hand, the very same version that was rejected, he still insists on saying that is how it occurred? Could that be a genuine remorse?
The accused remembers the series of events in that order, and he maintains that that is how it happened. So I believe he can still be remorseful.
And I just wanted to highlight with you that the fact that, do you agree with me that the fact that he pleaded guilty but withhold the correct version of events, that was not a genuine remorse? Do you agree?
I agree with not genuine remorse if he lied, but he maintains that that is how it happened.
And he maintains the version that was rejected.
Yes.
Nothing further, my lord. Thank you.
Yeah.
My Lord, only on the remorse aspect, your opinion of remorse is not only based on the plea of guilt.
No, it's also on the empathy for the victim and the empathy for the impact of the offense.
Impact of the offense?
On people, on the victim, on her family, on his family.
Thank you, my lord. I've got nothing further.
Just let us revisit page 3 of your report, item 5.14. You are saying the accused put his fingers in her vagina and realized it was wrong. I tried to put my penis in her mouth. I was busy trying when her mouth entered, when her mom entered. Is it what the accused told you?
That is what the accused told me.
It's not your own words.
No, it's not my own words.
He didn't say to you that he put his penis inside the mouth of the child.
I quoted there, I tried to put my penis in her mouth. I was busy trying when her mom entered. That is his words, my lord.
He didn't say to you that he put the penis inside the mouth of the child.
He said he tried.
Let me read for you the admission made by the accused. And you tell me what must I do now. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but I'll just highlight the most important aspect of this paragraph. In that moment, I acted impulsively and took my penis and forced it into the complainant's mouth. That's his own words when the charges were leveled against him. And I convicted him of rape based on what he said here. Now he said to you that he attempted to put his penis into the mouth of the child. Is it an indication of remorse? Because according to you, accused has all the signs of being a remorseful person. But he goes and lies to you. Do you have an answer?
I don't know.
You don't have. And finally, you are recommending life imprisonment.
That's what it means.
Why should you recommend life imprisonment if, according to you, the accused showed sincere remorse?
I think the aggravating factors are more, on a weighing scale, they are more than the mitigating factors. I don't think remorse is good enough to deviate from the minimum sentence.
You're saying, what are you saying? You say I must deviate.
No, I'm saying you should not deviate.
But whatever you just said, you said it's remorse is
I highlighted
weighty for me to deviate.
I highlighted the mitigating factors for consideration, but I don't think at the end of the day it's compelling enough to deviate.
Yes. Any question arising?
Nothing, my lord.
Mr. Albert,
Nothing. Thank you, my lord.
thanks for your time and your
Thank
excuse.
you.
Yes.
My lord, I've got one last witness. that would be-
Let's start. We've got only 2 days for this matter. Let's start with that witness.
Yeah. Pauline Gericke.
Where is your witness?
My lord, the witness had to wait outside. She's not the expert witness. The investigating officer has gone to call her.
Can I find out from the federalist? Yes.
Please state your full names and surname for the record.
My name is Pauline Gericke.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
I don't.
You swear that the evidence about to give you the truth, nothing but the truth. You so raise up your right hand and say so help me God.
So help me God.
Yes,
Thank you. My lord, may the witness sit down while testifying?
Yes, you may take a seat if
I'm
you like.
actually okay. I prefer to stand. Thank you.
You are the grandmother, maternal grandmother of the accused.
Correct.
Okay, you've had sight of the two reports by the psychologist, Ms. Ninow, and by the probation officer, Ms. Kelder.
That's
As
correct.
far as the factual background and the information regarding the family history is concerned, can you confirm that is correct?
I do confirm it's correct, yes.
So you've lived with Nicholas, he's lived with you mostly since he was 8 years of age.
That's correct.
You were aware of his drug abuse.
I was.
Can you give us an indication between Nicholas on drugs and, or the accused on drugs or the accused sober? Is that, could you give us an indication?
The accused on drugs and the accused sober. When Nicholas is on drugs, he's a completely different person.
I can't
He's
hear you,
not-
ma'am.
I beg your
Can you
pardon.
please raise up your voice? I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that thing is not going to assist you. Just raise up your voice.
All right. When Nicholas is on drugs, he is not the child that I raised. He is not the boy that I raised him to be. When Nicholas is on drugs, he becomes delusional. He becomes aggressive. He sometimes becomes quite manic. He doesn't reason properly. He's not himself. He looks different. He speaks differently. He behaves differently. The Nicholas that is sober is a good boy. In the years that Nicholas was sober, he did well at school. He played rugby, he played cricket, he did gymnastics, he played first team cricket and rugby. He did well at school. He was liked at school. He was a good boy. When drugs entered his life, that is when Nicholas lost the plot. And that was his downfall in life.
Okay. Do you know, were you aware when he became involved with drugs?
I am, yes.
Could you tell us what happened?
Nicholas was about 12 or 13 years old, and if I can just give you a little bit of background, but you've probably heard it all. His mom was also an addict, And at a point in time, she convinced me that she was sober and that she was doing well in life. They lived in Krugersdorp at that point, so I couldn't really verify it. But Nicholas wanted to go and visit with her. And she fetched Nicholas and his friend. He wasn't allowed to mix with this particular person at that point. And she fetched Nicholas and then she fetched the friend. And apparently they were drinking the whole night. And then the following morning, when she had to bring them home, they were too drunk and they'd been drinking throughout the night. And that was when she gave the two boys cat to sober them up, or to put them in a state that I wouldn't notice that they were high, drunk.
How do you know that?
This was confirmed to me by both Nicholas and his friend, and when Nicholas came home, I could see immediately that he wasn't just drunk, he was out of his mind, he was manic, he was completely not Nicholas.
And how did it go with the accused after that?
I beg your pardon?
How was his behavior after that?
You mean after
After that incident with the used cat?
after that incident, Nicholas just seemed to fall into, he just couldn't get off drugs. It just didn't, he would try and then he would fail, and he would try and he would fail, and it just didn't work.
Was there ever a significant period where he was drug-free?
There was. Nicholas went to, we eventually sent him to an institution in Nelspruit called Healing Wings, and he completed an 8-month program there. And he came out in, I think he went in about March, and he came out towards the end of November. When he came home, he was drug-free until about the September of that year. What I did was, instead of sending him back to school, I had him homeschooled and I got a tutor for him. And during that year, he was drug-free up until about the September. He was drug-free, and he was then my Nicholas. He was my boy.
And what happened to change that?
What happened to change that? And I believe in my heart that if this didn't happen, that Nicholas wouldn't be here today. His mum and her partner and their son had moved to Cape Town, and we were in church one evening and we got a call from her to say that they were on the streets. They were going into a shelter for adults, but they wouldn't allow my little grandson, I think he was about 4 or 5 at the time, they wouldn't allow him to go into this shelter. It was for adults only. And they wanted to put my grandson into a children's home because there was nowhere else for him to go. And I couldn't allow that. And Nicholas and his ex-fiancée and I spoke about it, and we agreed that they would have to come home. They promised me that they were drug-free. They promised me that they wouldn't bring drugs into my house. That was about end of August, early of September. Nicholas, it was just before he was going to write his matric exams. And it wasn't long after they moved into my home that they were taking, the three of them were taking drugs in my daughter's bedroom.
How old was the accused at that time?
I think he was 18. I think he was 18. 17, 18. He was in matric.
And would you say that that would have any effect on the offence that was committed?
Nicholas is not a paedophile. I believe that the fact that he had stopped his psychiatric medication 3 weeks before without my knowledge, the fact that he had been drinking and binging and drugging for 3 days must have had some effect on his psychological state of mind. Because Nicholas is not someone who would hurt a child. He's not someone that would harm anybody. If he, even when he was high on drugs and he became aggressive, he would harm himself, but he'd never harm anybody else. Never a child. Never.
Is there anything that you would want, or is there anything else in that context before I move on?
In the context
Anything
of...
that you wanted to add on that statement that you've just made?
No,
Okay.
there's nothing else I want to add.
Mary, what would you want to convey to the parents of the little girl?
I would like so much the opportunity to talk to those parents and to tell them how sorry I am for what happened to their little girl, and that it was my child that did it to them. And I would like to say to the little girl, I am so sorry. And I know that my son is so sorry. I know that he is sorry. It doesn't matter what other people believe. It doesn't matter. I know that my son is heartbroken for that child.
Ma'am, do you want us to proceed or want us
No,
to...
I'm fine. I know that he is. I know Nicholas is a protective person. He's protected me my whole life. He was always the one that came up for the underdog in class. He was always the one that stood up for the person that was in trouble. He was always the one at school that took the blame, even when he wasn't to blame. Nicholas wouldn't harm a child in his sober state of mind. I give you my word on that.
Is there anything else that you would want the court to know?
Yes, I want the court to recognize that Nicholas is not just the Dros rapist. There's another side to Nicholas. There's a good side. There's a side that I love. There's a side that I raised to be a good boy. But because of the first 8 years of his life, where he was abused and used. And because of the drugs that was brought into his life, and I do not for 1 minute say that Nicholas should not be punished. I do not say that he's innocent. He is guilty. I know that. But I do believe that there are mitigating circumstances and that there is another side to Nicholas that who is not the Dros rapist. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. I've got no further questions.
Yes. Any cross-examination?
Thank you, my lord. Ma'am, according to your evidence, there are 2 Nicholases that you know. The one, when sober, will not harm a child. And now that he has harmed a child, which this conduct, to which Nicholas will you associate it with?
Obviously, the Nicholas on drugs. Let me make myself clear. I'm not saying that the Nicholas on drugs would harm a child. But I am saying that the Nicholas on drugs is not Nicholas. It is not Nicholas in his sane mind.
Yes, I do understand you, ma'am. You say if he's on drugs, he's a different Nicholas. But now, my concern is, in his plea explanation, he tells this court that neither drugs nor alcohol perpetuated him to commit the offense. What do you say about
My
that?
Lord, with respect, I think in fairness, the question or the statement in the plea explanation is that he cannot rely as a ground of on drugs or alcohol to avoid a conviction.
Yes.
That
Yes. That's not a correct statement.
As a court?
He didn't say drugs influenced him. He said, despite the fact that he consumed drugs and alcohol, he could still appreciate what was happening around.
As the court pleases, I will rephrase. Ma'am, Nicholas says he was intentional. He knew what he was doing is wrong. Then how do you...
I would say on some level he did.
What was the answer? I couldn't hear it really.
I would say on some level he did know what he was doing.
Ma'am, there is evidence before this court that you took him in and adopted him at the age of 8 years to stay with you, and you gave him support, stable home, and you showed him love. And further, that at the time when you realized that he was on drugs, you took him to different institutions so that he can get help. But ma'am, it seems that all the instances that he was for that treatment, it did not help.
He was admitted to Denmark, I think 3 times for suicide attempts. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but Denmark does nothing for addicts because Denmark itself is full of drugs. And the kids are put onto medication that dope them, and they kept there under surveillance for 21 days, and then they sent home. Nicholas had no real treatment at Denmark. When Nicholas went to Healing Wings, he was there for 9 months. When he came home, he was clean for almost a year. He was studying, he was working hard, he was gymming. He had a good relationship with his fiancée. We had a happy home. And I believe that Nicholas was clean. I believe that that this was the turning point in his life. I believe that. And I was so thankful for that, because that's what I'd been fighting for all the years. To give him a chance at a future, a drug-free future, a chance at a life. And I believe that he would have stayed sober.
I do hear you, ma'am, and I do understand that as a parent, it will be painful that you're trying to get a child to get his act together, but he always relapse and go back to the same state. But now, the worry is he has been to rehabilitation centers 5 times.
You can discount the 3 times in Denmark because it means nothing. He was at Healing Wings for 9 months. My husband and I had to take a second bond on our house, and we had family members that helped us to pay for it. To keep him there was 100,000 rand, 96,000 rand for those 9 months, 8 months, 9 months. When he went to Harton House, he was there for 2 weeks, and that's all I could afford. My husband had died by that stage, and I did not have the funds. They wanted him to stay there for 3 months. But I couldn't afford to keep him there. So he had 2 weeks at Harton House. I'm fine. He had 2 weeks at Harton House.
You know, the witness keeps on being emotional, and there are recordings going on here.
Hello?
There are recordings that are going on. I don't know, should we proceed under this circumstance?
No, she's too emotional, ma'am.
Yeah, it doesn't record properly the voice. Yeah. I'm informed that her voice is not properly
It's
recorded.
not clear.
Yes.
Maybe we can stand the matter down.
Is it your last witness, Mr. Albert?
This is my last witness, my
How
lord.
many witnesses are you going to call?
I'm calling one.
One witness. Can we start tomorrow at 9 o'clock?
As a court, please.
Yes. Ma'am, we are going to adjourn.
I beg your
We
pardon?
are going to adjourn this matter.
Yes, sir.
And then we'll start again tomorrow at 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
Yes. You are under warning. I mean, you are court orderlies. These people are disturbing me. Ma'am, you will remain under oath. You don't have to discuss this matter with any other person.
No, I won't discuss it.
Yes, tomorrow 9 o'clock you must be here.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Mr. Ninow, your matter is remanded until tomorrow for mitigation, evidence in mitigation. The state is also going to call a witness tomorrow in aggravation of sentence. And after that, there will be arguments, and I'll deliver sentence. You understand? So the matter is remanded until tomorrow, the 17th of October, 2019.
That's good.
Got that, huh?